Hello everyone, welcome once again to my channel on research and statistics. If today is your first time of joining me on this channel, this is where we break down everything that has to do with academic research and also statistics. Now, it's important to understand that there's nothing that is really difficult in life except you don't have a clear understanding, information, and guide on how it should be properly done. So, my commitment on this channel is to see how I can break down academic research, research writing, research publication, and how you can make use of statistics to actually explain your research finding without any hustle. And that is the goal for this particular channel. So you are all welcome if this is your first time of joining me on this channel. And today we have a very crucial topic to actually discuss. Before then, I need to introduce myself. My name is Dr. Felix Ayodele Oyeleye, and I want to welcome you warmly to this particular channel. Please, this is a very important topic, and I promise you everything that you need to understand about survey research, about questionnaire design, about how do you validate your questionnaire. What is sampling all about? How do you calculate sample size? So that is the whole essence of this evening session. And I want to encourage you to ensure that you subscribe to this channel. This is a channel where you are going to get everything free, everything raw as it affects research and statistics. So if you're a master's student, a postgraduate student, PhD student, or you're a young lecturer, young researcher, or an academic at any level, this channel promises to be a very resourceful one even for each and every one of us. So once again, we are all welcome to this wonderful presentation on survey research, questionnaire design, validation, and sampling. So without really wasting much time, I want to really take time to go into this presentation, this discussion. We're going to make it as practical as possible. So maybe you are already conducting your research at the moment. I want to congratulate you. This is where you are going to get clarity. And if you have any question in the course of this presentation, please don't forget to drop your question on the comment section. Or maybe you are already conducting, you are already doing your statistical analysis and you are hitting some bricks wall. Please, this is where you to ask your question and get clarity and get clarification. So, welcome once again. This is research and statistics, and the only way I will, however, encourage you is to subscribe to this channel, because that is the only way you can encourage me to do more of this. Now, for more than 7-10 years ago, I've been encouraging, guiding people on how to do research. I have really been guiding people on how to do survey. I've been teaching statistics, and tonight I want to really release everything. In the past, I organized workshop, organized presentation where people pay to actually join my workshop. But this year, I've resolved that I want it to be a free class, okay? And it is an opportunity for you to actually participate in my class. So whether you're already writing your thesis or you are conducting a field work, or maybe you are planning a community study where survey is the backbone of your academic research, I want to congratulate you, but because this section is going to really shed a lot of light to how you can actually design your survey. Of course, you know that if you don't have clear understanding on the right way to design your survey and the right way to validate the survey, to calculate your sample, you end up wasting a lot of material. You waste time, you waste money, you waste effort. So please stick with me as we are going to go, we'll be going through this all-important topic even this evening. So again, I'll be looking at the comment section. If you have any question, please feel free to drop your question on the comment section. I will be going through the comment section to attend to your questions and give a sort of feedback But again, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like it. Share this particular video. Share it to your colleagues. Share it to your research partner and the like. Okay? So, it's important to understand that if you were to survey Nigerians, I'm going to give some background, okay, to this presentation this evening. But never mind, the whole essence is that this presentation is going to cover everything that you need to know before you can conduct a successful survey research. Okay? For instance, if you are to survey Nigerian on who eats more jollof rice, maybe you are looking at Lagosians or Port Harcourt residents. Now the question is, how would you begin? And that is the essence of this evening section, the essence of survey research. You want to be asking the right people, the right question in the right way. Now imagine you want to conduct another survey. Say you want to study youth unemployment in Lagos. You want to study the youth unemployment in Lagos, and you distributed your questionnaire only to maybe people in a particular religious group. Do you think that the result you are going to have will represent the unemployment youth? Exactly, that is why today's section matters a lot. So it will guide you on the attributes of a credible survey. How do you conduct a credible survey? How do you select your sample? And sometimes, do you really need to calculate sample size? These are some of the questions we are going to be discussing and providing answers to this evening. So please stick around with me as I take you through the whole concept of survey research. Now, by way of definition, a survey research involves collecting data directly from people through structured questions to understand behavior, opinion, or even facts. You can as well define it as systematic collection of data from a sample to generalize to a population. More often when we do survey research, we are doing a population study. But this population sometimes may not just be human population, it could even be animal population. Okay, and sometimes we could even talk of microbial population. So when we collect data from a population, and then the information we obtain from that particular data, we could generalize it to the entire population. That is a survey research, and that is our focus this evening. By the end of this particular class, you should be able to understand what it takes to conduct a survey. Okay, the principle involved in survey research, the essentials of survey research. I'm going to be making references to some individual colleagues, students that I have supervised in the time past, and those that have also assisted in the course of their research, so that you can have a clear understanding of the dynamics that is involved in survey research. For instance, if you think of the NCDC, the National Center for Disease Control, let's say they want to run a survey during the COVID-19 pandemic to track public response. The question is, how would they approach it? Or maybe the NDIC wants to survey bank customers and their goal is to establish their financial literacy. The question is, how should they approach it? And that is why we are looking at this evening. But it's important I tell you that survey research is the oldest form of research, academic research. Before we started talking about experimental study and laboratory investigation, survey research is still the oldest form of research. Men have been used to asking one another questions to gather data, to gather information. And the whole essence is that it is cost effective. You can sample a large coverage over a short time, and your finding can also be statistically generalizable, okay, when you conduct a survey research. But of course, I must also point out that survey research has weaknesses. The first is the response bias. Sometimes it is not what you want people to say that you get at the end of the day. But of course, it also depends on your design. If the survey is poorly designed, then you are likely going to get poor response. Okay. Another challenge with survey research is the problem of low return rate, what we call attrition rate. Maybe you are conducting a survey where you had to use questionnaire. Sometimes you have given out 500 questionnaires. Out of that 500, you may not get more than 450 return. So there is a problem of low return rates. So in this presentation, I'm going to be discussing how do you manage the issue of low return rates. Maybe that is your own challenge. This evening we're going to be discussing it. And how do you even properly design your questionnaire? Because many a times, poor design can be the genesis of the challenge some people do have with their survey research. And how do you manage response bias? Well, response is inherited in survey research, but we can minimize response by the way we design our by the way you design your survey, which is very, very important. So we're going to be looking at this from different perspectives, and I'm going to be giving illustrations that will actually drive home some of the points I will be making this evening. Let's have this example. Imagine you want to study how many university students in Abuja actually use e-library. Now, you can't interview, say, the 50,000 students in that particular institution, okay, in the University of Abuja. So what you want to resort to is to collect enough response to estimate that particular usage pattern. And that is what we do in survey. Survey research is like tasting one spoon of soup to judge the entire pot. You must pick the spoon carefully. So, and again, it is like you can also compare it with taking a snapshot of opinion and behaviors, but you will need the right lens to get that done. So now we're going to be looking at, in practical terms, how do you design your questionnaire? The questionnaire is described in survey as your instrument. Just like you use instruments to measure or to obtain data from respondents, your questionnaire this time around is technically described as your instrument. Okay, so let's look at how this instrument should actually be crafted. But the first thing you need to take note is that you need to define the objective. What do you actually want to measure? In the past, I've seen instances that students, colleagues come to me about their plan to conduct a survey. The first question I usually ask them is that, what are your objectives? You must clearly define your objective. Commonly, when you do questionnaire design, sometimes you want to measure knowledge, you want to measure practice, you want to measure attitude, okay? But this must be clearly defined in your research objectives, because the instrument can only be designed to achieve a particular purpose, okay? That is the first step. Now, still under the step you must take is that you must draft clear and concise questions. Your item, the item that makes up your survey must be clear. It must be concise. The questions must be concise. More often, I recommend that you should use simple English. Depending on your audience, please use simple English that people can easily relate with your respondent. And also depends on the level of literacy of your target audience. Cultural relevant language may be needed. That is why in survey design, if you are dealing with people from certain locality or maybe low literacy background, you may need to design that survey in their native language, or you get an interpreter that will have to interpret the questionnaire to them. And of course, at this point, you are thinking of what should even be the right approach to conduct this particular survey. Should it be a self-administered questionnaire, or you want to think of an interview approach? Many a times, an interview approach is most appropriate for survey questionnaire, but you must also have to deal with interviewers bias. If you are recruited enumerators to help you conduct the interview to get the needed response, you must be able to manage interviewers bias. It means your enumerator must be properly trained. You must train them to collect your sample appropriately. In fact, ethically, people have posited that it is not very credible for you as the main researcher to actually directly collect information, maybe by interview, because of researchers' bias. So bias is one thing that we just have to deal with when it comes to research survey. Now, another thing again I'm going to talk about now is the need for you to balance open and close questions. The need for you to balance open and close questions. There are times that open questions may be the appropriate for your research, while at another time, closed questions may be appropriate. You see, that is why it's important to go back to your objective. What is the objective of that particular research? Many a times, people want to conduct research survey, but there's no clear-cut objectives. The objective will give a clear focus as to how your research questionnaire should be designed. There are times that open questions will be inappropriate for your work, but for most parts, open-ended question is often recommended because it gives the respondent a sort of freedom to actually make their decision or to say what they actually have in mind instead of restricting them to a set of options. But of course, sometimes you may also want to guide your respondents. So it's important that your research survey is properly designed. Maybe at this point, I may need to also mention the fact that you may need to consult a statistician when you design your research survey. To conduct a credible survey, you need a subject expert, you need a statistician, you need a psychology expert, someone that understands the reasoning of the behavioral tendency of people within your target population. And sometimes you also need a language expert. Language experts that will be able to properly craft your questionnaire or will guide you in the crafting of your questionnaire. More importantly, if you have to deal with people that are deeply immersed in a particular culture. So this is very, very important. So I've talked about the need to use simple English, culturally relevant language, and the need to also balance open and closed questions. Now, the next point I'm going to talk about is the need to avoid leading or double barrel question. I've seen questionnaires in the past that I had to correct a number of items in that questionnaire. There was a lady that sought my help to conduct a face validation on her questionnaire. He was doing a master degree as at that time, and some of the item I saw there indicates that she really did not understand how questionnaire should be designed, the crafting of your question. Remember, if you ask a bad question will lead to bad answer, and bad answer will lead to a bad research. Okay? Now, let me give you an example. Let's say in one of, maybe you are conducting a study about the role of government and NGO, about healthcare and education, and then you put your question this way: do you agree that government and NGOs should do more about healthcare and education? Now, if I should ask you, what do you think is wrong with that particular question? That is an example of a double barrel question. Do you agree that government and NGO, you are bringing two subjects together at this point, okay? And then you ask, should do more about healthcare and education, bringing two concepts together at the same time, two sectors. That is an example of a double barrel question. Now, you must avoid double barrel question, otherwise you are going to get the wrong answer. The respondent will be wondering, am I to focus on government or the NGO? Should I restrict my response to healthcare or even education? So we must avoid a double barrel question. Now, what is the better way to actually put this particular question? Now, let's have it this way. Do you agree that government should do more about healthcare? Strict and direct question. Do you agree that government should do more about healthcare? So you can now follow this kind of question with other questions on education. So at one point, you should ask a specific question, not double barrel question, and you must also avoid leading question. Don't you think that rice is the best dish? That is an example of a leading question. Don't you think? It already indicates the bias of the researcher himself. Don't you think? Okay? So sometimes that kind of question, you can put it in form of statement. Please take note, it's not in every case that your questionnaire would be more of questions. Sometimes it could be statements that you want your respondents to either agree to or disagree to. For instance, instead of saying, do you think that rice is the best dish? You can just put it that rice is the best dish. And then you come up with a Likert scale. You want to say strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. Just in form of a Likert scale. Okay? So that will actually help you to elicit the right response for that particular item. So again, like I said, if you put the bad question, a bad question will lead to bad answer, and bad answer will also lead to bad research. Now, another thing we're going to talk about here, still on the questionnaire design, is the structure of your questionnaire. Every ideal questionnaire has a structure. There must be a section for introduction, another section for consent, another section for demographics, and then you now have your core question or core item before you can then have the closing. So you must structure your questionnaire in a way that will flow. There should be a clear flow in your questionnaire. Okay? You come from the question that introduces, maybe the section rather, that introduces the questionnaire to the respondent. The introduction should tell the respondent who is doing what and what is to be done. Okay? You can put it this way that number one, you introduce yourself. I am a master's student in the department of so, so, and so. This research questionnaire is designed to elicit information on the appropriate usage of contraceptives. You should introduce the whole essence of the research to your respondent. The respondent must know the whole aim, the goal of that particular survey. So you have your introduction section that tells the respondent on the aim of that particular research. And then you also want to mention to your respondents the confidentiality on the data that that respondent will be supplying. Okay? Please check my video on questionnaire design. I did sometimes ago an exhaustive presentation on how you could design your questionnaire, from the conception to the crafting of your question, and even to validation, to reliability check and pilot study. Okay, you can check my channel to see a lot of resources on questionnaire design. So again, like I was saying, your introduction is very, very important. Okay, keep it short, but make it concise. Okay, now the next point, still under structure, is the consent. Okay, it's important that you allow the respondents to decide, to take the decision to be part of that particular survey. It is one of the principle of ethics as it affects questionnaire survey. Okay, you must put a section there where the respondents will agree to voluntarily participate in that particular survey. Now that is the second section. The third important section is the demographics. The demography section is where you want to include identifiers. Of course, in research survey, you don't identify, you don't put specific identifier to your respondents. But it's still important that you have certain criteria, okay, that will properly categorize your respondents. So demography may include the level of education, the religion of the person, provided that is relevant to that questionnaire. You also want to know the local government, the location, the area, the senatorial zone. There are so many things you can ask under demography. Okay, you can ask about the gender. Gender also speaks for demography, so that you can properly classify your respondents at the end of the day. And then after that section, you want to go to the core question area. The core question, which is the main focus of your research itself. And it's important that your core question must exhaustively cover the objective of that particular study. It must conclusively, okay, or effectively address the objective of that particular research. And this is why, again, I will recommend that when you conduct a survey research, there's a process of validation that your questionnaire must go through for it to be a standard instrument for you to use for your research. I'm still going to make reference to all that in the course of this presentation. So the next point I'm going to talk about is question type. What are the question type that you should use for your survey questionnaire? Now again, this boils down to your understanding of how research questionnaire should be designed. We have the close-ended question that often take yes or no, or you use the Likert scale. And then we have the open-ended question type. Okay? But it's important to understand that your choice of question type must be appropriate for your survey. Again, that is where you need to consult an expert in questionnaire design. For over 7 years I've been designing questionnaire, I see a lot of questions that people put in their questionnaire that will not actually achieve the objective of their survey. So having said that, I will also talk about the wording. The wording for your questionnaire, I've talked about that. Make it simple, make it clear, avoid double-barrel question. Now, the last point under this structure is where I will talk about the length of your questionnaire. This is a very important aspect now. A few months ago, I did a presentation to some postgraduate students on how they could design their research questionnaire. And somebody asked me the question that what is the disadvantage of not having a long questionnaire? Then I needed to guide them to understand the reality of respondents. Interestingly, you that you are listening to me can also be a respondent to a research questionnaire at a point in time or the other. And one thing you will always agree with is that not many people want to participate in a survey questionnaire. Many believe it will waste their time. So people are not very patient. Now imagine you are conducting a survey and you have a questionnaire that will take like 5 minutes, 10 minutes for people to fill. The tendency is that number one, people will begin to lose patience. You'll begin to lose patience in the course of filling your questionnaire. And when they begin to lose patience, that is if at the first instance they saw your questionnaire 4 pages, 5 pages, they did not say, look, I'm not interested. No, this is too much. I don't want to do this. That is if they decide to collect it from you. At some point, what they call the law of diminishing return might set in. And they start feeling that, come, this your questionnaire is too long. And the tendency is that at some point they will start supplying the wrong response, the wrong answer. This is why more often I advise research students that your questionnaire should ideally not be more than 30 items, 30 questions. If you prioritize the core questions, you can limit your questionnaire to 30 questions, except in places where it is practically impossible. Recently, I conducted a survey where I had to use 50 questions, okay? Because the questionnaire I had to use for this particular survey is a customized instrument. It is a kind of all or none kind of instrument. It's either I'm using the entire instrument or I'm not using it at all. So, but that is an exceptional situation, okay? If it is within your power to limit your research your questionnaire to 30 items, it is better so that people will find it easier to actually respond to your question without they having that feel that you are taking too much of their time or probably you are actually wasting their time. So that is why limit your question to 30 items. Remove irrelevant question. Many a times the reason we increase or we accumulate or aggregate too many questions is because we dwell much on irrelevant questions. Some questions may not be relevant to that particular research, and yet we have them in our instruments. We must try to do away with irrelevant questions. Imagine somebody is conducting a survey on mosquito nets, okay? The mosquito nets in a particular community, and you are asking about their religion. You want to know if the person, the religion they responded belong to. The question is, how important is asking that question in that questionnaire? Or you are asking about the marital status of the respondents. We must understand the psychology of respondents. When people attend to our questionnaire, understand their psychology. People don't want to divulge information. So don't ask sensitive information if it is not necessary. And if it is necessary, you must have a, a very simple way or very technical way that you should craft that kind of question. But the most important point here is that avoid too long questionnaire. The questionnaire must, number one, flow, but it mustn't be too long. And again, I should also mention the need to avoid vague questions. Sometimes I've had experience with researchers that I had to validate questionnaire for, and looking at the item, you see some vague question, vague item. Let me give you an example. Take for instance, your goal is to conduct a survey. You want to know how reliable electricity supply is in a particular neighborhood. And then in your questionnaire you put there, you ask, do you use the unreliable NEPA light? How do you think the respondent will view that? Do you use the unreliable NEPA light? That is a vague kind of question. Now, but look at it this way. Let's say you put it this way. How many hours of electricity supply do you receive daily? That makes a better sense, okay? So we must avoid vague questions. Avoid vague questions in your item. This is why validation of your instrument, your survey instrument, your research questionnaire is very, very important. Imagine you are looking at a building. You are likely going to see the building just from one perspective alone. You need somebody else to look at it from another direction to give you another view of that particular item you are seeing. That is why you don't just design a questionnaire and begin to administer it on the field. Because if your questions or your question confuses your respondent, your data will also confuse your examiner. If your question confuses your respondent, the data you are going to obtain from that particular study will also confuse your examiner. So this is very, very important. So at this point, we'll be going to the fourth item in this discussion. Again, if you are just joining me on this channel, on this presentation, please don't forget to like the presentation, like the stream, share it, let others also benefit. We are in the information age, and one way that people can actually cure ignorance is to avail themselves information, and that is exactly what this channel is doing, availing us the information that will actually help us in our survey research. Please share the video, subscribe to my channel, and drop your comment. I will be attending to comment at the end of this presentation, at the comment section. So the next thing I'm going to talk about now is the validation of questionnaire. Very, very important. I can assure you from my experience in questionnaire design and guiding people on questionnaire design and survey research, about more than 50% of questionnaire people use for research are not validated. In fact, some people don't even understand the need for validation of a questionnaire. Now, in this presentation, I'm going to explain to you why you must validate your questionnaire before you use such even for your research. Now, imagine you want to conduct a clinical examination of people in a particular community to know if they have fever or not. Now, the instrument you are going to use in that case will be your thermometer, okay? Either the clinical thermometer or whichever type of thermometer at your disposal. But the credibility of that particular survey will depend on how sensitive that your instrument is. If your thermometer is not very sensitive or is damaged or faulty, or maybe there's any technical issue with that thermometer, it's not going to give you the expected, the accurate body temperature of your respondent within that community. So we must begin to see our questionnaire as an instrument that is to obtain data even from our respondents. So, and validation means you have to check that instrument to be sure that that instrument can do what it's designed to do. Okay? That is where you talk about, I don't want to bore you with technical terms like sensitivity, specificity, the accuracy of your instrument, but these are very important terms when it comes to the use of instruments. And questionnaire is not even an exception to this. Okay? So, depending on the kind of survey you are conducting, validation of your questionnaire is absolutely necessary. In fact, you cannot conduct a publishable research if your questionnaire is not validated. Most journals will ask you if you are taking that instrument through a process of validation. Validation simply means you want to standardize that instrument. You want to make sure that that instrument has been properly checked for what? For precision, for sensitivity, for accuracy in obtaining that data you want to obtain even from the population. So, at this point, I want to mention that there are different types of validation, okay? But depending on the extent to which you want to increase the credibility of your research, you will adopt one at one point in time or the other. Now, the first one I'm going to talk about is phase validation. Excuse me, please. So I'm going to talk about phase validation of your questionnaire. What does phase validation actually means? It simply means you want to consult a statistician to do a quick run through of your instrument. A quick run through of your instrument to establish if that instrument is sensible to your respondent or not. But this is only done by experienced statistician that is involved in questionnaire validation. Not necessarily all statisticians, okay? Statisticians that specializes in the area of survey instrument validation. So, phase validation is an expert looking at your instruments to be sure you have crossed all the T and dot all your I's as expected. That is a type of validation. Now, the next type of validation I will talk about is the content validation. The content validation tries to establish the clarity of your instrument and the relevance of that instrument. So this is more of a systematic review of the entire instrument to check for the clarity of each item. The way you construct your item or your question, is it clear? Number one. Number two, is each of the item relevant to that particular study? Very, very important. And it's also important to be sure that it covers all the necessary things. For instance, if you are to build a house and you want to drop a plan of that particular house, you want to check, is it detailed enough? Does the architectural design, does it address the roofing, the foundation, the molding of the block, the different area of survey of the land and all that. So that is what content validation does. And what we do in this area involves setting up a panel, a kind of jury that will include statisticians, it will include subject experts, it will also include the respondents. If you need more information on content validation, please check out my video on my channel where I discuss exhaustively what content validation of an instrument is all about. If you want to produce a credible paper on survey research, you need to conduct a content validation of that instrument. Some journals, standard journal, high impact factor journal will not actually accept any survey research that is not taken through the process of content validation, even from an author. Now, the next point, still on validation of questionnaire, I'm going to talk about is pilot testing, the pilot testing of your instrument. You want to do a pilot test of your instrument, okay? Usually when we conduct research, it's important that the instrument we use, if it's to be used for another study, it should produce exact results as the one we use it for. Okay? That is part of validating your instrument. So, let's say you are to conduct a survey on malaria prevention, say in Kano. And then the first thing you needed to do is to bring out 30 households. Before establishing or before sharing your questionnaire to the entire state, let's say it's supposed to be a statewide survey, before you begin to distribute your questionnaire, say to 500 households, after you have calculated your sample size. Now, in pilot testing, you want to distribute it to a small size of population. A small population size like, say, 30 households. And then you want to see if there's no misunderstanding on the question, maybe on the long-lasting insecticidal nets that they use. So that is the essence of pilot testing, to be sure that our instrument is reproducible. So pilot testing check the reproducibility of our instrument. So it is more of the instrument. That is why we do pilot testing. Okay? And you want to share the 30 questionnaire. Sometimes you can extend it to 60 depending on your sample size. If you could go as far as 60 and then you gather the questionnaire and then you want to enter the data into SPSS. With SPSS, you can conduct what we call the reliability check of that particular instrument. That is what we mean by pilot testing. So in pilot testing, we do reliability check of that instrument. And the statistical term we use is the Cronbach alpha. You want to check the Cronbach alpha. Usually a Cronbach alpha that is 0.8 and above is considered acceptable. It shows that your instrument is reliable. In other words, if I use that instrument, let's say after conducting my survey in Kano, I decide to use that same instrument to conduct another survey in Delta State, it will produce the same reliable results. I believe this is clear. Good. So that is on the subject of validating our questionnaire. So again, it's important I mention that you don't test a questionnaire that you don't test, that you have not tested. It's like you are driving a car that you have not tested. Okay? That car can actually break down on the road. Imagine you want to embark on a long journey and you have not checked that car, you have not tested the car, you have not checked the balancing, the alignment of the car and all that, and you decide to put that car on a long journey. At the end of the day, you might experience some disappointment on the road. So the watchword is that you don't take your questionnaire straight to the field. You must test them first, okay? So it's like you want to test a soup. Okay, you have just finished cooking your soup. You want to test the soup before serving it even to your guests. Very, very important. Very, very important. Now, I believe you are enjoying this presentation. Please, if you are enjoying the presentation so far, don't forget to like, don't forget to share and subscribe to my channel. Now, I'm going to talk about choosing sampling technique. Now, I'm trying to make this as simple as possible so that when you go to the field, you can effectively conduct your survey with confidence that you have done the right thing. Again, there's nothing as painful as after conducting your survey lack credibility, and the examiner look at your survey and say, come, you have not done this, you have not done this. And it casts a lot of doubts on the credibility of that particular research. So at this point, I'll be talking about how do you choose your sampling technique. How do you choose your sampling technique? You see, there are two types of survey that you can actually have. You can have what we call the census survey or sampling survey. Census survey is when you want to survey an entire population. Just like when we do census, a kind of national census, we want to count everybody in the nation. That's a form of survey, but that is a total survey. In total survey, you don't talk about sampling technique. You don't talk about calculating sample size because you are including every item, every entity, every individual in that target population. Okay? But now, when we talk about sampling survey suggests that you have a population, but your interest is not to touch everybody in that population, but rather to pick a representative or a sample from that particular population for your study. And at the end of the day, you want to generalize the findings you have made from that simple sample, that small sample you have taken from that population to the entire population. You want to know how Nigerians are feeling about the economy situation. You don't need to touch every Nigerian. You may have to take a sample, but that sample must be representative of the entire population. And at the end of the day, you want to generalize your findings to the entire population. So, and that leads us to talking about two types of sampling approach, or approaches rather. We have the probability sampling and we have the non-probability sampling. I'll start by explaining what non-probability sampling means. Okay? Usually, when you want to conduct a research, it depends on your objective for that particular research. If you are trying to explore a population, not for the purpose of generalizing your finding to the entire population, but just to have an insight about that population, you can adopt the non-probability sampling approach. Sampling is how you obtain your sample from the entire population. How do you sample? How do you pick that sample from that population? So, but in a situation whereby your goal is not to generalize it, but to get a kind of initial findings, initial idea about the entire population. For instance, let's say Nigeria is to conduct an election, and you just want to have a feel on how people are getting ready for the election. A journalist may decide to pick his microphone and the camera and enter the streets of Abuja and decide to ask a few people he or she met on the streets. That is what you call an example of non-probability sampling, and it's a convenient type of non-probability sampling. But that's kind of sampling is not generalizable, okay? But it just gives you an idea, like you want to feel the pulse of the community about the coming election. So the non-probability sampling is very practical type of sampling. It is relevant in research, but one thing is only that the only thing is that we don't generalize it, the result we obtain from it, to the entire population. And more often we use it when our resources are limited. And more importantly, when you want to generate a theory, you use non-probability sampling approach. But when you now want to test a theory, you have to use a probability sampling approach. We use probability sampling approach again to test a theory. But non-probability sampling, we use it to generate a theory. So for the non-probability sampling, you can have the convenience sampling like I mentioned in the case of a journalist picking his microphone, entering the streets to establish the readiness of the people towards the general election. We can also have a purposive sampling. Purposive, maybe your goal is to reach out to health workers. What is the level of preparation of health workers? Recall that health workers are very busy, okay? Many dey run shift and all that in their kind of work. Now you also want to know their readiness to participate in election, and you are not just interested in anyone you met on the field, on the street, but you are interested in specific professionals, okay, the health workers. So that is described as a purposive sampling, and recall it is a non-probability sampling. Now the third example I'm going to talk about is the snowball sampling. The snowball sampling is also an example of non-probability sampling, but this one is used to actually sample a hidden population. If you have a hidden population, we call it snowball. Maybe your interest is to sample drug users in the community. Recall that people will naturally not come out to tell you that they are drug users or sex workers. They are hidden population. Okay? When you want to sample them, sometimes you want to arrange private interview with such individual. Private meeting. People have sampled people in the jungle, isolated people in the jungle. So we describe it as a snowball kind of sampling. So now we have discussed few examples of non-probability sampling. Now the next we are going to talk about is probability sampling, which is the very important aspect of survey sampling. Okay, recall that it is when we are doing survey sampling that we talk about sampling approach. Okay, now for the probability sampling approach, the result we obtain from it is usually generalizable to the population. Now why is it generalizable? Number one, it must be based on randomness. Okay, it means there is no selection. You are not going to just select based on convenience like a non-probability, or just target a few. No. Okay, so there must be elements of consideration for every entity in that population to be sampled. That is number one. Number two, it must also be representative. If my goal is to study the Nigerian population, maybe the population of youths in Nigeria. Let's say the population of youth in Nigeria is say 100 million. Now, if I'm going to conduct a study to sample their interests, maybe social media interests, or maybe their leaning, religious leaning, or their political inclination, in that case, I must calculate a sample size. That is, there's a minimum number of youths. Since I'm not going to touch the entire 100 million youths, there's a minimum number of youths, Nigerian youths, that I must include in my survey for that survey to be considered credible. And that is where you begin to calculate sample size. Now, the reason we calculate sample size is because our sample must be representative of our target population. If it is not representative, the whole purpose is defeated, and we cannot use the finding of such study even for our work. So for probability sampling, we have different types of probability sampling. But the most common one is the simple random sampling. The simple random sampling involves drawing lots from your entire population. That one will require that you have what we call a sampling frame. You must have a list of everybody in that particular population, and then you want to draw your sample in a random fashion. Either you are using the lot approach or you are using a random number system. You can check my channel for information on simple random sampling, detailed information how you can conduct simple random sampling. And if you have question on how to conduct this, please feel free to drop uh, your question on the comment section. I will be attending to question like I've mentioned at the beginning of this live stream. So it's important that you sample based on randomization. You have a sampling frame. From your sampling frame, you can now use maybe random number system. You can use computer generated random number system to take your sample. Now, the next type of probability sampling I will talk about is the stratified sampling. The stratified sampling. Now, this is applicable when you observe that your population is divided into probably hierarchy or strata. Okay, you have several strata in your population. Okay, you make use of stratified sampling method. Maybe you want to divide them into gender. Okay, you have the male separate, you have the female separate. The whole idea is that there must be representativeness in terms of your sample. Your sample must truly represent the actual population. Okay, now another type is the systematic random sampling. Okay, the systematic random sampling is also very applicable when you deal with homogeneous population. Now, it's important I mention there are two possible ways we can classify a population. You can talk of homogeneous population. You can also talk of a heterogeneous population. A homogeneous population is a population with an even mix in terms of the element of that population. Okay, if my goal is to study Nigerian youth, that can be considered as a homogeneous population. Youth, strictly youth. Maybe I want to define age range between the age of say 25 to 35 years. I call them youth. I can describe that as a homogeneous population. Okay, and when I deal with homogeneous population, simple random sampling is appropriate for homogeneous population. But when you deal with heterogeneous population, populations that maybe you want to sample the entire residents in a community, remember that in that community you are going to have children, you are going to have teenagers, you are going to have young adults, you are going to have adults, you are going to even have the aged. That is described as a heterogeneous population, a population that is divided into different, based on demographics, divided into different strata. Okay, that is a heterogeneous population. Now, when you deal with heterogeneous population, simple random sampling is not appropriate for heterogeneous population. You will need to use either you are using a stratified or a systematic random sampling style. Okay, but I still also need to mention that in every probability sampling approach, the concept of randomization is inherent in it. Okay, please check out detail of my video on simple random sampling, stratified random sampling, systematic random sampling, and when it's appropriate even for your research. Now, the last type of probability sampling is the cluster sampling. When you are dealing with, maybe you are conducting a study that has to do with a large expanse, a geographic space, and that geographic space has localized clustered community at different points. They are not together. It's not a densely populated community, but a sparsely populated community where you have localized community distance away from each other. You make use of what we call cluster sampling. Like you want to select villages in, say, Oyo State, and then from those villages you want to select household. So we talk of cluster sampling. Good. I believe you are enjoying this presentation. If you have any question on what I've discussed so far, please don't forget to drop it on the comment section. And you can personally reach out to me for any assistance as it affects study, survey research. Okay? The goal of this section is to demystify everything that has to do with research and statistical analysis. Okay, so still on the example on the point of sampling survey. For instance, if you want to study, say you want to study traders in Balogun market, random sampling may be completely impossible. So cluster sampling of stores may actually make sense. Okay, so it's important you consult a statistician or an expert in survey for you to determine the appropriate sampling technique to use even for your study. Imagine you have just finished conducting your survey, and in the course of making your presentation, and you mentioned that you use simple random sampling, and somebody say no, you couldn't have used simple random sampling. Maybe the examiner, you couldn't have used simple random sampling for this particular. Simple random sampling is not appropriate here. What do you think the implication of that would be? The entire structure you have built, maybe for 6 months, for 8 months, or probably for 3 years, might come crashing right before your eyes. That is why it's important you get it right as to the type of sampling technique that is appropriate even for your study. Election survey. For election survey, stratified, you can stratify it into geopolitical zone. You want to survey, you want to know how people feel about maybe the previous election, or they are preparing for forthcoming election. You can stratify into geopolitical. Nigeria has 6 geopolitical zones. You can stratify it that way, and then you want to pick your sample through a simple random method from each zone. Another example is maybe you are doing health survey, maybe in the rural villages, then cluster sampling may be appropriate for that. How about research on hidden group, maybe like drug users, like I mentioned? In this case, you'll be using non-probability sampling. Okay, small snowball sampling is appropriate for that. Okay, and like I said, it's not in every instance that you calculate sample size when it comes to survey research. Okay, sometimes your interest may be an in-depth understanding of what has actually happened. Let's say, for instance, you want to do an exhaustive report on people that have survived plane crash. In that case, you don't need to calculate sample size. Okay, you don't need to calculate any sample size, because there are not many people that have ever survived plane crash. So if you are able to lay hand on one person, then you want to stick with that person to have an in-depth interview, to have an in-depth understanding of the experience of that victim. So your sampling technique is like you want to choose a camera lens. Okay, you must necessarily, if you pick the wrong one, you must pick the right one, because if you pick the wrong camera lens, the picture will become blur. Okay, you are doing a sampling, choosing a camera lens, pick the right one, otherwise your image will be blurred at the end of the day. So at this point, we are also going to be talking about when you need sample size calculation and when you don't need. I think I've mentioned this again and again, but probably I may need to still buttress on this again. That is not in every case that you need sample size calculation, but there are instances whereby you need sample size calculation. More importantly, if you want to generalize your study, you want to do national survey, you want to do public health research, you will need to calculate sample size, or you are doing a quantitative survey that the aim of it is to generalize your finding to the entire population or the target population. Say for instance, you are estimating HIV prevalence among university students. You will need to take you need to calculate your sample size, okay? And to calculate sample size, you need knowledge of statistical formula. The Concurrent formula is commonly used to calculate your sample size, okay? But it's also important, depending on the sampling technique you use, your sampling technique has implication on the formula, okay? The modification of the formula, the sample size calculation formula that you will have to use at the end of the day. I've dealt with this in a number of my videos. Please do well to check them out on my channel, Research and Statistics Guide with FA Oyeleyem. So, but again, when we do quantitative research, maybe we are doing a focus group, case study, you really don't need to calculate sample size. Or maybe you are doing exploratory research where in-depth, not breadth, is your actual goal. You don't need to calculate sample size. So, we have a lot of examples that we can point out that will actually help us to have a clear understanding. So, I'm going to mention a few examples just for the purpose of comprehension, understanding. Now, imagine a national survey of mobile banking adoption. You want to conduct a national survey, you want to know how many people have decided to key into mobile banking adoption. In that case, you will require, it will be needed for you to calculate a sample size, okay? Another instance, another scenario, imagine an in-depth case study of local government area waste management. You want to know, maybe you have selected a particular state and you want to understand how do they manage their waste. In that case, you don't need to calculate any sample size. You may only need to sit down with the manager of the director of that government agency to conduct an exhaustive interview on how he does his business. Now, let's see another instance. If you are surveying all medical students, say at the University of Ibadan, there's no need to calculate sample size, okay? You are studying the entire medical student. That is what you call a kind of census survey, a total survey. You are looking at every entity in that particular target population. Now, the last example I'm going to talk about is if you want to generalize that information across Nigeria. Say for the case of medical students, you are conducting a survey on medical students for you don't need sample size. But if you want to generalize across Nigeria, in that case, you must calculate sample size. In fact, your sampling technique is also very important because you can't just pick students from medical school, University of Ibadan, and generalize your findings to other institutions up north and down south. Okay? Very, very important. So, again, not every research needs a calculator. Sometimes all you need is just a diary, okay? And calculating sample size is like cooking jollof rice. Number one, you need to know how many mouths you want to feed. Otherwise, you may end up wasting food or you may leave some people unserved, okay? You leave them hungry. So, we are gradually getting to the end of this presentation. Again, if you have any question, please drop your question on the comment section. If you have any experience you want to share with us, maybe the toughest experience you have had with a survey research, please don't forget to drop your comment on let others also learn from you, your experience, what you pass through, and your challenges, the bottleneck you are actually having. So for this presentation, we have covered survey research basics. We have looked at how to design good questionnaire. I've also talked about how important validation is, that you must validate your questionnaire. If you want a credible survey research, validation is compulsory, is indispensable, okay? And I've also mentioned how you choose sampling technique and situation whereby sample size calculation is important. So survey research is actually simple when you understand how it is done and when you also respect the process. You must respect the process, the principle for conducting a survey. You are going to get it right in your survey research. So there are a lot we have learned today, and I want to say that if there's anything that should be your take home in this presentation, is that bad surveys does not only waste paper, it will also waste knowledge. Okay? And bad survey is not sticking to the process of conducting a survey. Either you're a master student, postgraduate student, or young researchers, or a career researchers, you must have a clear understanding on how survey should actually be conducted. Please drop your reflection, drop your comments, drop your information on the challenges you have actually faced in the course of administering your questionnaire, maybe on the field or maybe on the issue of sampling. Please don't hesitate to drop your information on the comment section. And if you have actually found this section helpful, please hit the subscription button, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with your classmates and colleagues. And you can also leave your final thought. You can't tell who this video is actually going to help. So, again, my name is Dr. Felix Ayodele Oyeleye, and this is Research and Statistics. I do this from time to time. Don't forget to follow me on my Facebook page and also subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll see you again in my next presentation. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.